taking advantage of a brief power vacuum, or are we witnessing a sort of scramble for Syria as Islamist-led rebels savor their surprise swoop on Damascus? Foreign powers seizing the moment to either clean house or settle scores. Turkey targeting Kurds in the north, the U.S. hitting ISIS positions in the east, and Israel firing on all cylinders in a bid to debilitate for a long while Iran-backed military installations. Assad never bent, and so he broke. But for more than a decade, Syria's seemingly immovable strongman could rely on Russia, powerful neighbor Iran, and its Lebanese proxy Hezbollah. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei blaming Assad's fall on a U.S.-Israeli plot, and without naming it, Turkey. How will Tehran react, particularly if the regime there feels under threat? Will the dust settle, or is there more to come in the region? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking if it is a scramble for Syria. Joining us from Montpellier in the south of France, Syrian activist Fadi Dayoub, co-founder and executive director of Local Development and Small Projects Support, the aid agency. Thank you for being with us here on France 24.
Thank you.
From Herzliya in Israel, Eran Etzion, former diplomat, deputy head of Israel's National Security Council. Good to see you.
Hi, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Barbara Slavin is director of the Future of Iran initiative at the Atlantic Council think tank. Welcome back to the show.
I'm a distinguished fellow at the Stimson Center. I used to direct the Future of Iran initiative at the Atlantic Council.
For correcting the record,
You're quite welcome.
We'll get that cleared up. Manlio Graziano, let's see if your CV needs updating. Professor of geopolitics at the Paris School of International Affairs at Sciences Po. Your latest book is in Italian, and it is called?
Disordine mondiale, global disorder.
Global disorder.
Yep.
Sounds like you're the man for us. Thank you for being with us here on France 24. By the way, you can listen, like, and subscribe to the France 24 debate wherever podcasts are streamed. As banks and shops reopen in Damascus, it's still sinking in. It's not just Assad that's gone, but a 6-decade-old dynasty. These are images from the family hometown of Kardarda, that's near the northern Mediterranean port city of Latakia, where activists torched the tomb of the late strongman Hafez al-Assad, the father of Bashar al-Assad. Fadi Dayoub, your thoughts when you see those images and when you hear tales of people. We showed one report earlier of a man released from prison after 32 years.
Well, it's amazing images, not to say the least. Who would have thought so? I would say even 20 weeks ago. It's a huge historical moment for Syria. I think it took us 13 and a half years to get here, but I'm not sure we have arrived where we wanted to be yet. So there is still some long road to go, but at least it's a major step I would hope to be forward.
Let's dive right into it, Fadi. We're not there yet, you're saying. To get there, is it up to domestic players or foreign players?
Well, first of all, it's up to Syrians. Okay? And I would love to say it should be also in a very strong manner left Syrians to do so. It is our country. We've been struggling in the last decade or so with us being so much a part of an international overall geopolitical game, and it's really first of all up to us. Definitely, at one stage, we will be needing some kind of international aid, and its presence to kind of help us would be useful. But first of all, let's try to see if we as Syrians can figure out a path. It is very important at these very early stages that we define what would be the future Syria that we all agree to have. So that's going to be a tough one. But we've been through tough places before, and we've proven to be very resilient. So let's see how we make it through this one.
All right, let's cross now to France 24 senior correspondent James Andre, who's in Damascus. James, tell us where you are.
Well, I'm actually at Ameyad Square, which is really the center of Damascus. And tonight, well, the people of Damascus are celebrating. Why are they celebrating? Because for them, it is what they call their first night of freedom. Earlier on tonight, I was discussing with a gentleman who was telling me that for him, he'd only ever known this square full of policemen, of muhabarat, the famous security services, and soldiers, telling me that they could not come out and speak or say anything that they wanted to say about politics or about the government. He said, well, tonight we are here, we're free, we can shout freedom, we are finally free. Another man who was a Syrian refugee for years in a northern country of Europe was telling me that he'd rushed back here. He said he was one of the very first Syrians to return to the country after years in exile. And he said, to be here is amazing. He said, as a kid, I've never seen anything else than the rule of Bashar al-Assad. And he said, finally, we can do what we want. And indeed, he told us he was incredibly happy to witness this moment. So yes, it is a very, very important night for Damascus. Why? Because it is the first night where there is no curfew. People can stay out and enjoy the city.
And we see that the boy on what I presume is his father's shoulders behind you, hoisting a new flag, one that has 3 stars instead of 2. James, it's not all been celebrations, and you've witnessed what it's like, the ordeal for loved ones trying to find those held in Assad's jails.
Yes, absolutely. Even here on this square, I met someone who was telling me that he was looking for 2 of his uncles who'd disappeared in this terrible, awful security apparatus, this carceral machine that was created by the regime in order to survive all these years. And basically what we saw, if you like, is a sprawling underground complex known as a Palestine prison, which is very well known to everybody here in Damascus, and which is infamous. Obviously, it is it's a place that is feared across the city, or was feared across the city. Well, now it is just guarded by a few militiamen. And indeed, people come up. We saw that. They come up and they say, please, can you tell us, are our loved ones here? Are their bodies here? Can we see the records? Well, the records have been burnt. We saw that with our own eyes. And then we visited this complex where you have cells, some of them as small as 3 meters squared with no windows. Those were the ones they called the tombs. There were 12 of them under a building. And all you have there is no light, just a small hole for the air, and absolutely abominable detention conditions with, of course, these guards that were there who said they'd participate in the liberation of the prison, and they said that what they found inside when they arrived were people who were going some of them actually had gone crazy, others had lost their sight because they'd spent so much time in the dark. So yes, I can tell you it is a very important night tonight.
And James, on Sunday we saw the images of Bashar al-Assad's last prime minister being escorted out of the prime minister's office to go negotiate the rendition of the old regime. You sat down and spoke with him.
Yes, absolutely. We had an interview with him earlier on with the team. We had a long interview. And, well, we were in that very house, actually, because he is still inside. He was actually finishing up packing his bags, ready to leave. And, well, he told us lots of things, of course. He said that he was only a prime minister for a few months. He also said that he'd witnessed the very end of the Assad regime. He explained to us Bashar al-Assad at the end did not believe anybody, so he didn't see it coming. He said that he had the signals, but that indeed Bashar al-Assad left without telling anyone. And indeed also he explained that, well, he believes that the oncoming power potentially well. We asked him what he thought of al-Julani, who is the strongman now here, the Hamatay al-Sham, who is now in control of this province and more largely a large part of the country. Well, he told us that he believed that he was an educated man, that he was potentially a good solution. But of course, he says, we'll have to see. He said that what he wants is something that's inclusive for all Syrians. Of course, he's from the outgoing government, and he said that he was forced into that position. Anyway, this interview will definitely broadcast parts of soon enough.
All right, James Andre reporting live there from Damascus, where it's still heady days since Sunday's fall of Bashar al-Assad and that confirmation that came in Monday that the ruler of Syria of 24 years had fled to Moscow. Barbara Slavin, you've now had 4 days to let it sink in. How does it change your view on your remit, that part of the world?
Well, I think in some ways this whole year has been as momentous as 1979 was for the Middle East. We look at the strength of particularly the Iran-backed so-called axis of resistance a year ago, and we look at where it is now. Hamas, Hezbollah, Syria decimated, Syria gone from the Axis camp, most likely. And it is truly astonishing that these kinds of changes have taken place. And, you look at the overreach, which characterizes so many of these players in the region. And I think we can talk about whether we're witnessing overreach now by some of the other external players in Syria. But certainly Hamas overreached. It provoked a ferocious response from Israel, which has destroyed Gaza, which has killed tens of thousands of people. Hezbollah got in the act, and now Hezbollah has been decapitated and weakened considerably. And Syria actually tried to stay out of the regional conflict, but it wasn't sufficient. Bashar was a very flawed leader, a very mediocre individual, frankly, who had chances to reorient himself, but he could not take them. And the habits of repression, which he inherited from his father, only grew worse. And so we see the result that his military collapsed in the face of a concerted onslaught. And he's in Moscow, I suppose, thinking over all the mistakes that he made during the period of time after he inherited Syria from his father. So it's a stunning, absolutely stunning series of events that I think very few of us could have predicted, certainly not back in October of 2023.
Yeah, Iran Etzion, do you agree with Barbara that this is a 1979 moment, a nod to when the Iranian Revolution toppled the Shah?
I tend to agree in terms of the magnitude, the scope of the events and the degree of change, which cannot be overstated. I agree with her. I'm not sure it's 1979. Actually, for me, it brings memories from the toppling of the Saddam regime in Iraq, and then the so-called Arab Spring, where we saw similar pictures, I'm sure all of our viewers remember, from various Arab capitals, in Cairo, in Tunisia, in many other Arab capitals. And we all remember how it evolved, usually not in a very positive way. So while on the one hand, one cannot but rejoice with the Syrians for their newfound freedom, and obviously also appreciate the fact that the so-called axis of resistance led by Iran was dealt such a decisive blow. By the way, at least this last part of it, the Syrian part, totally undesigned by Israel. It's again the rule of unintended consequences of war. Israel by no means intended to topple the Assad regime. Now Netanyahu, of course, is trying to appropriate it as part of his quote-unquote total victory, but this was not an Israeli design, contrary also to what Khamenei was saying, that this was a plot by the Americans and Israelis. It's a totally unintended consequence. Israel actually wanted the Assad regime to remain and was only trying to separate between this regime and the Russians and the Iranians, a process which was actually underway, unrelated to Israel. That's also an interesting point for historians to study. But in terms of the regional developments, I agree. It's pretty clear that Iran was dealt a very significant blow. That the axis of evil, axis of resistance, axis of evil, depending on your viewpoint, was actually dissolved. But I do believe this is just, another turn of events, and it's certainly not the last one. And I think the way I would advise our viewers to think about this is kind of in terms of 2 or 3 stories. On the upper story, you have the Russians and the Americans and the Chinese battling for regional influence. And we'll have to see what the Americans do next. We now see the Russians on the losing side quite clearly. But the Americans, at least judging by Trump's initial statements, are not rushing to kind of claim victory by no means. Trump is saying, let this unfold and we're not going to intervene, contrary to previous American presidents. So we'll see about that. That's the upper floor, if you want. Then on the regional level, we see Iran obviously having dealt a serious blow. We see Turkey trying to take advantage of it. And we see Israel also trying to take advantage of it. And what we're seeing is what a famous Israeli expert on Middle Eastern affairs, Dr. Asher Sasser, has been saying for over 20 years now, that the future of the Middle East will be determined by the 3 non-Arab regional powers, Iran, Turkey, and Israel. And Syria obviously is a case in point exactly for that right now. Then on the local level, obviously it is up, as was already mentioned, it is up for the Syrians, hopefully, to determine a peaceful future for their country. And I can only join what Secretary Blinken has stated 24 hours ago in terms of the 4 conditions or the 4 standards that he would like any Syrian regime to uphold. I won't name all of them, but essentially it is a Syria that is prosperous, that respects minorities, that respects human rights, and does not pose a threat to any of its neighbors, and does not become again a base for terrorism. Yes. Let's hope the Syrians can build such a new Syria on their own, with assistance from those external parties that are coming in peace and not with hostile intentions.
Yes, you spell it out quite nicely, talking about those 3 non-Arab powers in the region, and the dust, by the way, far from settled. There were celebrations, as we saw live there from Damascus with James Andre, tensions in other places. The HTS-led alliance, by the way, taking over from the Kurds in the eastern city of Deir el-Zor. Deir el-Zor is an Arab city. It's a key link to neighboring Iraq, a city taken just last week by the Kurds from government forces. It's unclear at this point if it was done peacefully or forcefully. HTS and allies have been focused on the regime in Damascus. Turkish-backed militias from the so-called Syrian National Army, they've been battling Syrian Kurds, pushing them out of Manbij and Tel Rifat in the north. For Ankara, it's about keeping insurgents away from its borders and inciting some to return back to Syria. Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who emerging as the big winner and, well, crowing about it. Let's listen.
While Aleppo, Hama, Homs and finally Damascus passed under the control of Syria's real owners, the Baas dictatorship, which had survived through blood, cruelty, oppression and tyranny for 61 years, has completely collapsed. We're pleased that Tel Rifat and Manbij, which have been under the occupation of the separatist organisation for years, despite the promises, have been cleared of terrorists.
Cleared of terrorists, in this instance, he means Kurdish militias. Erdogan speaking on Tuesday in those remarks. This Wednesday, the supreme leader in Iran directing most of his fire at the U.S. and Israel, but Ali Khamenei also firing, you'll hear it in this clip, an implicit shot across the bow at neighboring Turkey.
Yes, one of Syria's neighbouring states has played an obvious role and will continue to do so. This is evident to everyone. However, their main agents, the primary plotters, and the main control room are in the United States and within the Zionist regime. We have proof. This evidence leaves no room for doubt.
Manlio Graziano, if I could borrow the title of your book there, how does this inform global disorder, what's just happened, or does it perhaps bring a new order?
I doubt about a new order. I think it's another step toward more disorder in the world. I understand that people are happy now. They celebrated the fall of the dictator. So it's very clear that they must take advantage of this moment. But the situation is so complicated that it's very difficult to be optimistic for Syria today.
But do people learn the lessons of the past? You heard Barbara Slavin talking about overreach on the part of Iran. We knew there was overreach on the part of the United States in 2003 with its invasion of Iraq. Are these concepts that the new masters of Damascus are going to bear in mind, and perhaps regional and global superpowers are now going to bear in mind?
I have also doubt about the capability of people to learn from previous lessons. They repeat the same mistakes, almost everybody. I see, for example, now Turkey is playing the role of the victor of this war, but are we sure that they are able to control the HTS as they claim? Or as they hope to? I'm not sure, because when you use some proxies, you have to consider the proxies have their own goals. They don't necessarily correspond to the goals from their godfathers. So there are many hypotheses, because the network of possible alliances and changes of alliances here is so dense that everything can happen. So this is why I think that, speaking of Iran, because I heard many things about Iran tonight, but Iran, it's always difficult to understand what is the cause, what is the effect, because it's clear that the so-called axis of resistance is broken. But I think that Iran has a huge responsibility in weaken the axis of resistance, because the regime in Iran is very weak, and was weakened by the revolt of some time ago.
The Women, Life, Freedom movement.
Exactly, and people don't. I mean, it lacks completely legitimacy with the Iranian people. And it's very visible in the elections, for example. Even in this time, when there was a candidate was so-called liberal, or not liberal, but people didn't go to vote because they don't believe in. By the way, one thing that few people know is the fact that Iran is the least religious country in the Middle East. So everything is playing in this scramble.
Barbara Slavin, you talked about the overreach of Iran earlier. With what has just transpired, is the regime in trouble, or all it has to do is get a nuclear bomb and everybody leaves it alone?
Well, the regime is in trouble. As I've mentioned, it has been considerably weakened, and not just by the events of the last year and a half, but as Professor Graziano mentioned, the protests, the lack of legitimacy, the calcification of this system under Ayatollah Khamenei, who's been there since 1989. There are a lot of problems, and the regime, I think, really needs to focus on those internal problems. The support for the axis of resistance has never been popular. In Iran, people complain about spending their precious resources on so-called Arab causes. So, his rhetoric doesn't suggest that he gets the message, but he really needs to. In terms of overreach, though, I was referring, frankly, to Turkey and to Israel, because the steps that they've taken since the fall of Assad and in the run-up to it are also extremely worrisome if you want to see stability in Syria. This offensive by HTS could not have taken place without the support of Erdogan and of Turkey. And there's an affiliated force as well, the Syrian National Army, which I think is a proxy of Turkey. And of course, it emerged from Idlib, which the Turks very much influenced. And what we see is they're going after the Kurds. Now, the Kurds are protecting very important prisoners, ISIS prisoners, in various camps in Syria. What happens if they just open the doors and let those people out, which they may well do? You also mentioned Iran and the bomb. There's a very worrisome report that came out just a couple of days ago from the International Atomic Energy Agency that Iran has ramped up its production of highly enriched uranium and is at a point where it could easily weaponize. So the Trump administration is going to have a lot of interesting choices to make when it comes in. My hope is that it will try for a deal with the Iranians. I think the Iranians now have new leverage from the nuclear program, but they're weaker because of what's happened to the axis of resistance. I worry about triumphalism and I worry about overreach on everybody's side, when what we need to be focused on is helping the Syrians somehow recover from the terrible ordeal they've been through, particularly in the last 13 years.
Fadi Dayoub, your thoughts on Turkey. Are they the big winners, or are they also perhaps overreaching and it could come back to haunt them?
A little bit of both. I don't think they are the big winners. They definitely are on a, compared to others in a more advanced situation. I don't think what they are trying to do in Syria is the right path. I do understand why they need to do something, but I don't think it's the right effort. I think there is now appetite, at least from the Syrian democratic forces, negotiate, and I think it's the better choice to go forward. I don't think violence or trying to impose or force in a solution would be beneficial to anybody in the mid and long term.
Is Erdogan someone who does restraint, who understands, who knows his own limits?
Well, it depends on the period. Yes, in the past he has been so. It has been. He is also a little bit weakened within his own country. I mean, this victory was also good for him to improve his chances. But he's been losing popular support, and the last municipal elections he lost quite a bit. So he is in a position where he also has some kind of internal weaknesses that they have to deal with. And he's been trying these weeks or months to a little bit to ease the tension between him and the Turkish Kurdish component. So I think he is realizing that there are probably, the going through this in a very forcible manner is probably not the best way actually going forward. It's not a solving. It's not a problem-solving method. It's a problem-hiding method, actually. And actually, I think he's intelligent enough to realize that. But I don't know at what time he will actually take the point. I think he just tries to negotiate from a stronger hand position, and he's just strengthening his hand. I don't believe he thinks really that he's going to solve this problem by military operations. If he thinks so, I think he's completely wrong. But we have several, I would say, indicators that he probably would at the end go into a negotiated solution.
All right, so that's when it comes to Turkey's role in HTS's stunning success in just 12 days, swooping for Damascus. They faced little resistance. The Syrian army, badly paid, demoralized. Part of that demoralization comes from the fact that Israel had repeatedly targeted their Iranian backers inside of Syria. And since the fall of Assad, more than 350 Israeli airstrikes in just 48 hours, targets including air defense systems, military airfields, missile depots, weapons production sites in Damascus and other cities, not to mention 2 Syrian naval facilities. Israel also pushing tanks onto the Syrian side of the Golan Heights. They've drawn international condemnation for it, a violation, say, the likes of Russia and others, of the 1974 agreement that ended the Yom Kippur War. Prime Minister Netanyahu insists Israel has no intention of staying long or pitching up in Damascus. But as for the Golan Heights itself, well, that's a different story.
Everyone understands the tremendous importance of our presence on the Golan Heights, and not on the outside. Our control of the Golan Heights ensures our security. It ensures our sovereignty. The Golan Heights will be an inseparable part of the State of Israel for eternity.
Eran Etzion, is there hubris in that statement?
Yes, of course, it's undeniable. As I said before, Netanyahu is trying to make the horrible failure of October 7th into a success and to leverage it politically.
Let me ask you the question. Whether or not it's Benjamin Netanyahu, would any Israeli government, seeing that there's this moment of wavering, right? Assad is out. The new masters of Damascus have yet to really take hold. Is it too big a temptation, and would they have gone after those military installations, no matter who the prime minister was?
It's an excellent question, and if I may, I'll share an anecdote. When I was approached by some of my colleagues who are still in the system, just last week when things were unfolding, and they sought my advice, I told them, under normal circumstances, under a prime minister and the government, which are fit for office, unlike what we have right now, I would have probably recommended more or less what the government is actually doing. In other words, capture a limited amount of assets, both on the ground and politically or diplomatically, and also try to negate as many military capabilities as possible. This is a rational policy, and as you say, and I agree, this is probably what any capable Israeli government would have done. However, there's a huge difference between the international legitimacy and the local and regional legitimacy that this government has compared to any other normal, quote-unquote, Israeli government. In other words, it's all the difference in the world, in my eyes, as a diplomat and as a former government strategist, between acting on your own, which is what this government is forced to do, and acting in concert, in coordination with regional and global actors. And what, for example, the two actors I have in mind is Jordan and Turkey, both of which are important regional actors that share, at least to a certain extent, interests with Israel with respect to Syria. And a different Israeli government might have coordinated its actions with those two actors, at least to a certain extent. But this government is considered a pariah, both in the region and beyond. So I hope you see my point. There's a certain series of policy steps that were taken that I don't necessarily disagree with. But it's all the difference in the world if it's done in coordination with other like-minded countries, or if it's done in a totally unilateral way, which I suspect is what this government is.
Eran, what's your guess? Did the Israeli military give a little heads up, a phone call to the United States, to the Pentagon, and to Moscow, to Russia?
I assume there was a certain amount of dialogue with the Pentagon, and I just saw that the commander of CENTCOM is coming to Israel now. About the Russians, it's a different story. Again, as I alluded to before, Israel was trying, before this new turn of events, to separate the Syrian regime from Iran and from Russia, and was in a dialogue with the Russians to that effect, because the Russians, for their own reasons, were beginning to feel fed up with Assad's behavior. So there was a dialogue. But I don't think there's a commonality of interests between Israel, and again, I'm neutralizing the issue of Netanyahu and his own interests, in terms of the Israeli actual national security interest, I don't see a commonality of interests between Israel and Russia. Russia was certainly supporting and still is supporting Iran, siding with Iran, working with Iran in Ukraine, and a capable Israeli government would have a long time ago designated Russia actually as an enemy rather than a friendly state. This goes to Syria, goes to Ukraine, and goes to the overall policy that an Israeli government should have adopted with the Western world against Russia.
Manuel Graziano, since October the 7th of 2023, Israel's repeatedly hit targets in Syria and has helped to a large extent to demoralize and weaken the regime. You wrote in a piece for the Speakman Center, for Israel, the Assad regime was a convenient neighbor, hostile in rhetoric, but predictable in practice. Did Israel succeed more than it wanted to?
In toppling Assad? Yes, I think so. It happens sometimes when you use external actors. You don't know how to control them. I think for Israel is not a good news, the fall of Assad, because now they don't know, as everybody else don't know, who is the next owner of Syria and what they are going to do. So I can understand very well the military actions they did, because they have to be sure that this kind of military equipment doesn't fall in the hands of people who are completely unpredictable. They don't know. There are questions about the new Taliban or Taliban-style regime or Iranian-style regime in Damascus. I don't think so, but in any case, it's a concern for Israel, for sure. Israel, since October 7, Israel received a gift, a very horrible gift, but a gift from Hamas, because that was the moment in which Israel could do what they wanted to do, but they couldn't do because they didn't have a good pretext, a motive to do.
Take on Hezbollah in Lebanon, you mean?
Not only that, attacking Gaza, attacking the West Bank, attacking Lebanon. It's nothing new. We knew perfectly that since 1967, there was this idea of extending the authority of Israel on the West Bank. And immediately they started building colonies over there. So it's a long story, and this government is less probably cautious. They don't have many strings attached in the sense that they can do what Israel couldn't do in 1967, they couldn't do in 1973, because the United States was much stronger at that time. Today, the United States proved incapable to restrain Israel in any way, so they are taking advantage of it. And I'm not sure that Netanyahu or someone else would have been a difference, because Netanyahu and this policy in Gaza and everywhere else is very popular in Israel.
Now, there's Israel on one side, Iran on the other. Among Syria's other neighbors, Iraq, for which any change in the regional balance becomes a domestic tightrope. Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani receiving, you heard Iran Etzia mention him, General Michael Kurila, the commander of the U.S. Central Command. That's a reminder of that continued U.S. presence in Iraq, the same Iraqi government which last week, when there was a different regime in Damascus, welcomed a meeting of foreign ministers with Iran and Syria's now deposed foreign minister. And, you know, I asked you, Barbara Slavin, about a weakened Iran. Let's not forget the Assad regime has its roots in that same pan-Arab movement, the Baathists, from which Saddam Hussein was born. Would you worry more today about Iran or Iraq?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I think Iraq may get some additional freedom of maneuver here because Iraq, of course, was used as the conduit by Iran for weapons going into Syria, through Syria, and into Lebanon to rearm Hezbollah. And Iraq really didn't get a say in that. So I think we're seeing a lot of nationalist tendencies in Iraq. The Iran-backed militias there may be a little bit weakened by this. So it's possibly an opportunity for them to begin to reassert some real sovereignty over their own country, which they really haven't had since 2003. We'll see how Soudani plays it. Now, the U.S. is supposed to be withdrawing the 2,500 troops it has in Iraq proper to the Kurdish region next September. And we will see if that takes place, if Trump wants to just simply pull out altogether. I hope he doesn't, because I think it's important to retain some sort of U.S. military presence, not just to fight ISIS, but also to give some sense of a choice to the Iraqis, that they don't have to be entirely under Iran's thumb anymore.
Now, we've been talking in this show about foreign powers, whether or not they feel hubris. There's an outgoing administration where you are in Washington, Barbara, and the defense secretary on a visit to Japan, taking what sounds like a measure of the credit for the change we're witnessing. Let's listen to Lloyd Austin.
The combination of what we've done to help Ukraine defend itself and put more pressure on Russia to help Israel do what it's done has made Russia weaker and Iran weaker as well, and that has had an impact on what we've seen in the Middle East here, and Russia and Iran's inability to respond to what's transpired in Syria.
Barbara, is there an element of hubris in that statement?
Yeah, I wouldn't go too far on that. Obviously, the U.S. has helped the Ukrainians, and Russia made a terrible gamble in starting that war and intensifying the war in Ukraine, which has weakened it tremendously and left it unable to come to Assad's defense. I wouldn't give us that much credit for this particular series of events, though. I think they really have to do with Assad's own enormous failures, as well as the fact that he didn't have control over all of his own territory. I mean, the fact that Idlib, for example, was ruled by HTS, the fact that the Turks were so active in that part of Syria means that he didn't, he had what they called useful Syria, but he didn't have his whole country. He never recovered from 2011 and from the use of egregious force against peaceful protesters then. So, no, I don't think the U.S. takes a victory lap. I don't think anybody takes a victory lap until we see how this all turns out and who actually controls Syria and whether those poor people finally do get a measure of freedom after everything they've been through.
Fadi Dayoub, we're out of time, so just in one sentence, let me ask you, the U.S., which weakened the Assad regime by through sanctions, the oil and gas money, which never went back to Damascus, should that oil and gas money now go back to the Syrian government to pay civil servants?
Let's wait and see who's in charge.
Fadi Dayoub.
Before we make that decision. Yeah.
Fadi Dayoub.
I'll definitely say yes at the time, but I'm looking at the Syrian people. We need it. Okay, now we definitely need to have proper conditions for that as soon as possible, I would say. And I'm rather confident that we're gonna make it. I also have my kind of reserves and pessimistic views about what can happen. However, I'm very optimistic about the resilience of the Syrian people, and I'm sure we're gonna make it.
We'll leave it on an upbeat note. Fadi Dayoub.
It's gonna take us some time.
Fadi Dayoub, I want to thank you so much for being with us from Montpellier. I want to thank Eran Etzion in Herzliya, Barbara Slavin in Washington, Manlio Graziano. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.